Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm located here in California, so I'm assuming that many of you, like me, are actually participating in this webinar from home. But please welcome, and let's dig in here. And if you note from the start of the presentation, what we're really focused on is artificial intelligence and the rise of intelligent content services. But what I wanted to start with today was just a quick discussion about where we are from an information management standpoint. Some of the things not covered in my bio. I deployed my first imaging system for a nonprofit as an employee 25 years ago in 1995. I spent time both at FileNet and at EMC with Documentum. So a lot of experience with these technologies. And what I would tell you over that 25 years is that a lot of the challenges that we see from customers are the same challenges that we saw 20 or 25 years ago, which is both a little bit surprising and a little bit disappointing as we look at the legacy of these different technologies. This information that we're sharing with you here in this slide represents some results from a survey that we conducted with UK financial services companies just in November of last year. So it's fresh data. And if you look down here, we look at the various challenges that we see these organizations are facing. So literally, 8 out of 10 respondents indicated that their systems for managing information are not fully connected to one another. A very similar and familiar stat that we would have seen 20 years ago, the amount of time that employees are spending looking for information is 52 minutes. That's literally 15% of the business day spent just looking for information across these different systems. And when we talk about the number of different information management systems, the average number of systems that are reported by the respondents to this survey is 9. So literally 9 different content and information and data management systems in their environment. Now, as we kind of focus in on artificial intelligence, something else interesting came out of the survey, which is 60% of our respondents already see the potential for artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms to really help automate mundane or routine tasks in their organization. But kind of that same number, that same percentage, 60% believe that their organization really lacks the skills to capitalize in on AI. So we'll talk a little bit about the potential that AI has, machine learning has, to help automate and to help enrich information in these organizations and address some of these legacy content challenges. But we'll also talk in ways about making this easier and more accessible for organizations and customers. But the punchline here and the concern here as we talk about artificial intelligence, intelligent content, and as we talk about modernizing, really is that the old way of managing content and the data that makes that content accessible really aren't working anymore. So what we really want to talk about here is the rise of intelligent content services and how modernizing will allow you to adopt a new approach that will better address some of these information management challenges. So let's talk first about intelligent information management, which is actually a term that AIM kind of coined a few years ago. And really, when we start talking about intelligent information management, and particularly as it pertains to content, what we're really talking about is how we're marrying data and content together. And the argument here really is it's that structured data, that data that we're able to enrich content with, that really turns content, unstructured information, into information that's accessible and manageable by the organization. So that combination of data and content makes content more accessible. It makes content more contextual. I understand what circumstances I should be consuming that information in. It obviously makes it easier for us to deliver information anytime, anywhere to users who need it. And also the addition of data makes it easier for us to govern and secure information. So if I think about modern requirements for information, I want immediate access to information. I want it available on any device. I want it to be delivered to me contextually so it will help me perform work. And of course, I want it to be governed and secure at the same time. Now, when we talk about the promise of artificial intelligence, fundamentally with artificial intelligence, what we're talking about is this ability to understand content, data, information, as well as a knowledgeable human. But here what we're really thinking about with artificial intelligence is how do we do that at scale, and particularly when we talk about mundane tasks. When you think about at scale, what we're thinking about here is both how do we train and enable artificial intelligence to take on some of these mundane tasks, but then how do we apply that across multiple activities inside of the organization, perform that at a scale that really machines bring greater efficiency to, bring greater value to, and certainly allow humans to move away from some of these mundane tasks and focus on more valuable knowledge work type information. So when we think about artificial intelligence, what are some of the things that we're expecting from AI platforms? Well, first and foremost, we want to be able to recognize content types, be able to auto-classify information. We also want to begin using this capability to extract data from content, to begin to enrich information, enrich metadata associated with content, again, to improve access, to improve findability, to improve and help automate work processes. Further down the road, as we look at artificial intelligence, we see other benefits from this technology. How can we predictively deliver information? So if I begin to understand how users and analyze how users use information, the importance of different information to different roles in the organization, now I can begin to make intelligent guesses about what kind of information they need and begin to predictively deliver that information to those users. I also can begin to recognize patterns and connections between information, begin to surface information that looks like other information to users. And again, all of this is about empowering knowledge workers to do their jobs more efficiently, more intelligently. And then finally, another great thing, so we talked about pattern recognition. AI is great at pattern recognition, but it's also great at identifying things that sit outside of patterns, identifying outlying data points. And this is great from a fraud detection standpoint, for example, or from an intelligent exception management perspective. So some really powerful areas where AI can begin to deliver value for an organization. Now, let's talk a little bit about AI in specific. So a lot of times when we talk about AI and machine learning, a lot of customers start to think about things like Google Vision, Amazon TextTrack, various cloud services that are available out there to help us begin to get more information about the content and data that we have inside of our organizations. And as an example here, and I actually updated this one a little bit, I took an automobile accident. Great example of how we might apply AI to an artifact from, let's say, a claims process for a property and casualty insurer. Now, here's a great example. I took this actual photo, I loaded it up for Google Vision. They actually have a tool online where you can demo the capability. You put a photo of an accident, in this case, into the service, and it returns back a bunch of data values associated with that photo. And it's a great example of the power of artificial intelligence in working with content. And in this case, actually kind of a new content type. You know, there's no text embedded in this document, perhaps with the exception of that license plate that's visible as part of this image. Now, you can see on the right the values that kind of came back from Google Vision, and this shows both the power and the limitations of some of these generic services in terms of really supporting your business today. So we get some values, and I highlighted those in gray, that are, you know, of questionable value to the organization. Land vehicle, vehicle, car, motor vehicle, very generic tags associated with this. Bumper, tire, family car, and it did identify the fact that there is a vehicle registration plate there, but didn't necessarily read that plate. We also get some values here that are either inaccurate or completely no value to you in terms of processing this image. So in this case, minivan, asphalt, gas, minibus. It's not a minivan, it's not a minibus, and I don't see any asphalt, or, oh, I see asphalt. I'm not sure how that would help me to process a claim associated with this. But embedded in here, we also get some values that are interesting. Parking, for example, this is an accident that happened in a parking area. There is a van involved in this accident, and as you can see, this generic model has correctly identified that there's a Chevrolet Tahoe in this image. Now, let's look at what we can do with more specifically trained models. What I just showed you was the results you can get from a generic model. What I'll show you now is the type of results that we can generate with a more custom trained model. In this case, a custom machine learning model that has been trained with existing content, existing data to specifically look for values that we want to extract from an image. So in this case, we want to know what the make, model, perhaps color of the two vehicles are that are involved in this accident. So a Chevy Tahoe happens to be gold mist metallic. On the right, it's actually a Dodge Ram van, kind of a previous generation model, and it's bright white. There's also some other information in here that would help me better automate claims handling. So I recognize that this is an Illinois license plate and that the license number, K241771, is fully readable in the case of the Chevy Tahoe on the left. Now, on the right-hand side, I can see that it is an Illinois plate, but I can only get a partial license number off of that plate. But here, let me point out some specific things that we're doing. One, we're getting very specific information from the accident. And two, we're mapping that information into very specific fields that will allow me to further automate and drive the work process in handling this claim forward. Now, one of the things that's kind of small on the screen that you may not notice, but we also have the ability here to potentially identify one of the vehicle operators. And he's kind of embedded in the system here. If we had existing content for customers, we would be able to match up and confirm that perhaps based on a license that was submitted associated with this claim, who a potential operator in the case of this accident is. So what I'm showing you here is a great example of how we can do enrichment associated with an image, either using generic models to pull generic data values out, or using very specific custom trained models that enable the organization to better process information associated with this claim. And again, we've gotten a lot of valuable information about an accident here, all without a human operator having to interact with this particular artifact associated with the claim. So enrichment, one great example. We also see benefits here from an automation standpoint. Clearly here, I can do things like beginning to populate values into fields. I can use this information to kick off subsequent workflows, launch work processes in the organization, perhaps accelerate this claim through a process. Other examples of automation. When we look at text-based documents, we can do things like auto-classification, we can do forms recognition, we can even do validation. So if I'm an insurer and I'm doing policy issuance, one of the things I might want to do up front is very quickly identify whether a form's been filled out correctly, and if it hasn't, be able to respond to a customer and give them instruction about how to complete a form. This allows us to do things like intelligent exception management. So in this circumstance, I might have a form, I look at the values on the form. If it's filled out correctly, I move it automatically along. If it's not filled out correctly, I want to automatically push it back to someone for correction, either to the customer or a customer service representative who can reach out and get that form filled out. The other use cases we see, and we kind of touched on them on an earlier slide, but where people begin to aggregate information using artificial intelligence is now I can begin to develop insights from a business perspective. Now, you can't see a lot of accident damage here in this particular picture, but imagine if you are a property and casualty insurer and over time you collect a massive amount of images, and let's talk about the modern claim, right? It's all about photos, it's all about video nowadays in terms of documenting the accident and the accident damage. Well, over time, I might be able to build out a very intelligent database of images of accident damage, and I might be able to correlate that information with repair estimates. So one of the use cases we've seen with some of our insurance customers is they want to begin mining into accident damage photos so that they can look for similar models, similar sets of damage, and then automatically come up with acceptable repair estimates associated with that damage based on information they have in their organization. So there, We're using data developed originally by AI to really build out a data lake that allows them then to have more insight, more intelligence about their business. Other use cases are things like fraud identification. We find that for a lot of organizations, particularly property and casualty insurers, believe it or not, people submit the same photo of the same accident for two different claims. So we want to be able to cross-compare that information. And if you're a very large P&C insurer, obviously you have thousands of claims adjusters. You're not familiar with the fact that there may be a previous claim already submitted with the same imagery. So a lot of power that AI provides here to really automate, enrich, and drive business. The other benefit, we talked earlier about that combination of data and content. For a lot of our customers who are thinking about modernization, one of the things they're looking at is how do I connect disparate systems? We talked about information silos. We talked about multiple systems in our survey early on. Well, the challenge of connecting disparate silos in an organization often is that these different systems have different data models, different sets of metadata associated with content. Sometimes it's very, very simple. Sometimes it's very complex information. So one of the other powerful benefits that AI can deliver is to go back and look at existing or legacy information and help us enrich that data model and normalize that data model across multiple systems, which means then as I expose that content from these different systems, you can search for it in an entirely consistent and intelligent fashion across disparate systems. So really establishing kind of a master metadata model that sits across all of these different connected systems. So another key benefit from an enrichment standpoint, and kind of is illustrated here, one, we can normalize that information, and then as you see kind of with metadata F, we can even add new metadata information that doesn't exist in any single one of those models. But the goal here is really to enrich that data that we have about that content, to make that content more findable, more usable, more valuable to the organization. In a moment, I'll touch on some modern compliance use cases, but if you think about customer CCPA and the California Consumer Privacy Act, one of the key requirements there is I've got to search across multiple systems to be able to surface up what information I have about a consumer. In order to do that, we've got to start thinking about how we bring these different systems together. I had one customer share with me the fact that the way they were addressing CCPA was literally to give a single user or set of users in the organization access to 9 different systems, and then they would log into those different systems, do different searches across those different systems to begin to collect that consumer information. Not very efficient, not very secure. As this particular individual also shared with me, she had written down login and access information for all these different systems so to help her keep track of it. Now, we talked earlier about the rise of kind of these intelligent content services and the value of AI, but as we're talking about modernization, I thought I would quickly share with you 7 other reasons why customers are looking to modernize some of these legacy ECM platforms. So let's dive right in without further ado and move through this fairly quickly so we can get to questions. But as we go through here, 1, talking about modern content as more than just documents. A lot of organizations, when they think about content management, they think about Word documents, they think about PowerPoint, perhaps even email, scanned images, so on and so forth. But as we just illustrated with our claims example, you know, kind of modern content is much more than just documents and scanned images, right? We've got social media, we've got photos, we've got video, we may have audio, a variety of different electronic sourced information that we now need to manage in the same way as vital information for the organization. Maybe part of your customer experience, maybe part of the claims process, maybe part of customer testimonials, may even be part of how you do marketing inside of your organization. And let me give you a great example here. We had a large P&C insurer in the United States who was looking to give their call center operators, their customer service reps, the same access to information their customers had. And what they had begun to rely on for outbound customer communications was email and SMS messaging. And the challenge was they could send an SMS message out to a customer. That customer would receive the message, contact the call center as they had been directed to do, and the call center operator had no visibility to the SMS message that had been sent out to that particular user. So a great example of very simple messaging that isn't accessible to a customer service representative. Now, the added challenge that we see here is not only is that a new content type that we need to be able to access and surface almost in real time, but the volume was fantastic. Very, very big property and casualty insurer, literally 250 million, 300 million emails and SMS messages that they send out a month. So over the course of a year, we're talking multiple billions of objects that we need to be able to ingest and instantly service to a customer service representative in order to enable them to do their job. So modern content, more than documents and images, and the volumes and intensity of this information is dramatically increasing. Reason number two, information silos aren't going away. So when we talk about bridging across different systems, a lot of customers say, hey, that's a temporary situation. I'm going to move information into a single consolidated repository. And yes, that is a viable strategy, or maybe it isn't a viable strategy. Here's what we see with modern content management. You have a variety of different tools that end users use to work with content, to work with and share and collaborate on information in your organization. And I just illustrated a couple of examples, right? We have Google Drive, we have OneDrive, we have Microsoft SharePoint. You might use sync and share tools like Box or Dropbox in your organization. You may also use a tool like Slack for collaboration. Your marketing team may have an entirely different set of tools, things like Adobe that they use in their environment. And then finally, you may even have business applications like Salesforce in this circumstance that has its own set of content tools and content repositories. Each and every one of these is in effect a new information silo inside your organization. And I would argue that users are going to continue to self-provision, continue to work with technologies in your organizations that make it easier for them to do their job. So these new silos are really a reality of the modern workplace. And the goal here is not to move all this information into one place, but instead be able to intelligently connect across different systems. And this is one of the reasons why we see kind of the old legacy ECM strategy, put everything in one place, as really unviable for customers in kind of a more modern content management age and in these circumstances. And oh, by the way, if you think this is a lot now, think about this from the standpoint that, you know, any tool, any app, and the rate that new apps are coming out is only multiplying at this point, accelerating at this point. So we expect this problem to continue to compound rather than to get easier over time. We've touched on this already, but you know, when you think about disparate silos in your organization, you think about different content types, you've also got to think about how you're delivering information in your organization. And that can be for users, that can be for customers, that can be for partners in your organization. But the bottom line is that that access to and delivery of content really defines your overall experience, both from a customer perspective and from a user perspective. So are we serving information into Salesforce, for example? Are we ingesting things like Google Mail or Outlook content? And is that part of our customer interaction as an organization? The bottom line here is you really need to be able to access content from anywhere, and we talked about those silos, and you need to be able to deliver that content to anywhere and really establish content as an enterprise service for your organization. So a couple things that are hidden here that we really need to talk about. One, we kind of talked about those silos and that ability to plug into different silos as a key aspect of a modern content services platform, an intelligent content services platform. So whether that's existing legacy ECM environments, whether that's new cloud storage environments like Amazon S3 or Glacier, whether that's sync and share applications, or any other repository, business system, otherwise inside your organization, where some of this information represents customer information or valuable information to drive knowledge work forward. You want to be able to connect into those environments. We talked about the importance of having a universal data model or that master metadata model that sits on top of that environment that makes that information accessible outside of those systems. But the other thing that we see from kind of a modern content services perspective, not just the ability to get information and content from anywhere, but to deliver it to anywhere. Modern content services platforms, unlike legacy ECM environments, we don't talk enough about this, is legacy ECM really a collection of different technologies acquired over time and kind of plugged together. So if you have familiarity with integrating with these technologies, one of the real challenges is that the API exists all over the place, right? If you want, you've got some core document management content, maybe even process management capabilities in a platform, but if you want records and retention management, well, that's an add-on module with its own set of APIs. If you want capture capabilities, that's an add-on module with its own set of APIs. So ECM platforms are inherently kind of difficult to plug into and integrate with or even build on top of, where a kind of modern content services platform was really designed with this paradigm in mind, which is we're going to be this universal service for delivering content and accessing content in the organization with a single comprehensive API. That allows us to plug into various business and productivity apps. It allows us to build content and case management solutions on top of this environment. And it allows us with a very modern RESTful API to serve content across a variety of different mobile apps, services, other use cases inside of the organization. So really a tool designed for this modern content use case. Now, when we start talking about modernization, a lot of times you kind of get this to and fro between business and IT, platform and solution. And a lot of organizations have made a big investment in building solutions on top of content platforms in order to really accelerate time to value. Really, the intention was to be able to address specific use cases, specific circumstances for customers or common use cases to hopefully get them up and running with new technology more quickly. Now, one of the things that we like to focus on here is don't really know if this is a sustainable approach for most organizations. I'll give you a great example. We have an insurance customer. Sorry, all my examples are insurance customers. We have an insurance customer that has recently decided to move off of FileNet onto Nuxio. They literally have 30,000 users across 7 different business units, and they are running 100 different applications on top of FileNet. So a solution approach here literally isn't possible. There isn't 100 different solutions to kind of plug and play and replace their existing solutions. What they really need is a platform that makes it easy and quick for them to build and rebuild and move these solutions across one at a time as they need to. But more importantly, when we start looking at some of these solutions, number one, how out of box are they really? And what we see with a lot of solutions is that customers originally purchased them thinking that they're going to deploy straight out of the box and then realize that they require a lot of customization to really work the way that customers want them to. Two, because a lot of these solutions have extensive code written on top of the platform, they actually create more information silos rather than tearing down those silos and making that information accessible to everyone. Literally, I've seen solutions that make it virtually impossible for other applications to plug in and access content because it creates conflict between the two systems. In a lot of cases, customers end up paying twice for solutions. One, you pay for the IP that runs on top of the platform, and then two, you pay for the projects associated with it. In a lot of cases, those projects are every bit as expensive as building what you wanted in the first place from scratch. And then finally, if you're a vendor and you offer solutions on top of platforms, one of the things we see here is that that creates a fragmentation in your roadmap. Not only are you supporting a platform, but now you have specific solutions for specific customers that all require enhancements and updates. So the challenge there is you spend more and more of your time supporting your solutions rather than bringing innovation to your fundamental platform. We believe for modern content services platforms, the low-code approach is just a much better approach, right? We're going to leverage flexible and reusable templates to help you with that time to value, but the templates are really configurations that are built on top of that platform. They're native to that platform, not customizations above that platform. 2, if we give you a paradigm that allows you to do drag and drop configuration of user interfaces, of workflows, of data models, what we're really doing is making it easier for you to build applications on top of this environment. It's great, 1, from the standpoint of moving old applications to new environments, but 2, as you move forward, and this is the critical challenge with ECM, is because these tools were so difficult to build on top of, people kind of put things in place and then stopped using the platform. And what we want to do is really enable an agile environment where customers are leveraging content really to help transform their organization, deliver better customer service, deliver new products to market more quickly. And in order to do that, you need a tool that you're going to continually use so you can update and iterate on those applications. 3, having a common platform underneath all of this is a great way to begin moving in the right direction from a modernization standpoint. And obviously, all of this is built on top of a common platform. Because it's built on top of a common platform, any roadmap investment here is at a platform level, which means that innovation, those new features, capabilities are available to everyone. All right, coming down the backstretch here, a couple other things that we look at from a modernization standpoint. So, lot of new requirements from a compliance standpoint. Probably the most significant ones that we're seeing right now have to do with the California Consumer Privacy Act for our US customers and GDPR, which kind of preceded it for our European customers. And 2 key aspects here. One is the fact that customers are being asked to be able to quickly and easily represent to a particular consumer what information they have about them. And then 2, this right to be forgotten that I've highlighted here, which is really, really critical when you start looking at some of these legacy systems, because it becomes very difficult, 1, to find all this information about the consumer, but 2, to be able to go in and effectively delete this information. And as you can see here in the case of GDPR and also for CCPA, the violations of these different acts have some pretty significant fines and business penalties associated with them. And by the way, if you don't do business in California and think that CCPA may not apply to you, you should also know that there are 14 other states right now that are currently considering similar legislation to CCPA. So for customers who are looking at existing systems and kind of these modern compliance challenges, we kind of look at how do we unlock some of this critical customer information to be able to better comply with these regulations. We talked earlier about kind of being able to bridge across existing content silos, make it easy for us to surface and find that consumer information and be able to report that information back to a customer. But 2, we also need to start thinking about unbinding certain information. Email and other customer communications, and particularly structured customer communications, things like statements, billings, explanation of benefits, become very, very difficult to manage in this environment, particularly if a consumer says, I want to delete this information. And I'll share a case study with you about this in a moment. So we want to be able to unbind these customer communications, identify a specific consumer communication and be able to delete that communication. And there are a lot of ways to begin to go about this, but modern content platforms will allow you to get this information out of mainframes, out of legacy environments, be able to separate it out, be able to easily report it to customers, and then delete it if you need to be able to delete it. We also can do things like automating retention, archiving. So as you take this information out of mainframes, move it into cloud environments, we can begin to intelligently start moving this information into lower cost, more dedicated archiving environments in the cloud. So storage tiers that you can manage more cost effectively than either mainframe DASD or even things like Amazon S3. So we're talking about things like Glacier there. The ultimate goal here is not just to be able to comply, but also to help reduce costs and risks inside the organization. Cost perspective, obviously continuing to process these things on mainframes, store this information on mainframes, very expensive for organizations, as well as very expensive maintenance associated with things like CMOD, Mobius, other tools in this environment. And from a risk standpoint, what we find for most customers across banking, insurance, and a variety of different industries, if they're using print stream technologies, in most cases, they don't have a retention policy associated with this information, and most of our customers are storing a ton of information that they don't need to store. A couple final things. We talk about cloud. Cloud for most of our customers is very important. In fact, the conversation we have with customers today really isn't about on-premises versus cloud. There are some notable exceptions for customers who need to continue to operate in their own data centers, and we do support that. We think most modern content platforms should be able to support on-premise. But the real conversation that we have with customers is really about your cloud or our cloud, and where do you want to operate. We don't believe there's kind of a one-size-fits-all approach here, which means that we should support your standards, whether that's GCP, AWS, Microsoft Azure, or other proprietary formats like IBM and Red Hat from a cloud infrastructure perspective. You should be able to choose what infrastructure you run on. You should be able to also choose whether it's a self-managed offering or a vendor-managed offering. And what that means is, do we operate it for you, or do you operate it yourself in your own cloud environment? Modern content platforms should support hybrid configurations. If you have data privacy or data locality requirements that say information has to live in a certain place, then we should be able to support you storing that information in that place, whether that's your data center or, for example, an Amazon data center in a certain geography. The key point here is your journey to the cloud. We should facilitate that with a modern content platform, but we should make it easy for you to do it in the way that you want to do it. The final thing that we see here is that scale is exploding. So this is actually a real customer example and an illustration for a very large property and casualty insurer, how over the course of the last 20 years, they've grown their content under management and their information under management to about 10 billion objects. Yes, it's very small on here, but those are millions. So 10 billion objects is a very large content repository, a very large store of information actually currently being managed on-premise today, utilizing the existing Documentum system. But if you look at their future and you think about these SMS email messages that we talked about earlier and volumes approaching 3 billion annually, if you look at customer communications that they are routinely generating, and again, back to that compliance requirement, just those two sources literally creates 5 billion new objects a year. So you can see, just projecting outward, where over the course of just the next 2 years, you're literally going to double their content under management. And over the next 5 years, you're literally going to more than triple their content under management. And this has some real implications for organizations from an architectural standpoint. Simply taking things like legacy ECM environments and moving them to the cloud isn't going to solve that challenge, isn't going to magically enable these old client-server technologies to suddenly scale up and deal with these new volumes. So what you really want to look at, and what's kind of illustrated on the left-hand side, cloud-native architecture. So if you look at true modern cloud-native content services platforms, they offer individually scalable services. You know, scale the front end, if I have to scale search, if I have to scale storage, I can do all of that independently and on commodity hardware, which is exactly how things like Amazon and Google are designed to scale out. I can also scale elastically, so I can scale it up for peak volume, scale it down for non-peak processing volumes. I want to be able to support multi-tier archiving, and this just means, hey, I want to be able to use lower cost storage when I'm able to use lower cost storage in that environment. If I do have peak volumes, maybe I also want to look at things like Amazon Lambda and other technologies that provide serverless scalability for compute-intensive activities. So if I'm going to move a bunch of content in, and let's say it's photos or video, and I have to do rendering or transformation or even transcoding, then I want to be able to scale that up to deal with that volume, use serverless capacity, and then scale it back down when I no longer need it. The point is we want to give you an open architecture that supports your preferences and can also scale very intelligently, very inexpensively to deal with peak processing requirements. Now, so we're kind of getting into our last few minutes here. Let me give you a quick couple of examples, and then we can open up for questions. So first use case here is this is actually a top 5 global bank, and this is their operations in the United Kingdom. So this is actually a banking use case versus an insurance use case. And this is really one of the first customers where we saw this compliance requirement about GDPR. So we had a customer who had about 2.5 billion documents that were sitting in legacy ECM systems. In this case, IBM CMOD, and it was actually spread across 7 or 8 different systems. And what they really wanted to do, kind of in keeping with what we talked about earlier, is establish kind of a content services platform as a true enterprise platform for content, which means that they really wanted to be able to seamlessly integrate that environment with a variety of different customer service systems. And those are both internal service systems as well as customer self-service systems. You know, they had a large number of documents that were spread across different locations, different systems. They were facing GDPR from a compliance and regulatory standpoint. And their original thought was, hey, let's build this ourselves. And what they realized in that process is that, hey, we can take advantage of modern technologies like Elasticsearch, like MongoDB, NoSQL databases, new search technologies without having to rebuild a content management system ourselves. Plus, they lack the resource to actually do it themselves. This is also a rapidly growing banking organization, literally top 5 globally. So that growth was creating even further issues for them as it took more and more time to try to build this themselves. Obviously, they selected Nuxio as their preferred platform. And, you know, first benefit, substantial cost reduction versus the maintenance and operating costs they had with their old CMOD systems. First deployment, first outcome, which is probably more important, they were able to introduce an entirely new mobile app that enabled personalized statement delivery to all of their customers, self-service app on a mobile device, and clearly mobile, very important part of the customer experience for banking organizations. However, the other piece here, and when we talk about subscription requests, what we're really talking about here for this customer in the UK is GDPR requests from consumers who want to understand what information you have and potentially to be able to respond and even delete information based on that request. We do 2 things here. One, we consolidated those systems so it was easy for them to find out what information they had about their customers. And 2, we use our workflow management capabilities to actually manage the process associated with these subject action requests. So making sure that we don't drop one along the way, that we're responding in an appropriate amount of time to different customers, and then subsequently deleting information if we need to delete information. So all that is very important to this organization, but what was really, really valuable for them, and I mentioned kind of establishing this new foundation, this new content services as an enterprise platform for them, was really giving them the ability to now leverage this service, and hence the name content services, as the foundation for their ongoing development activities for digital transformation. They had lots and lots of plans to leverage content in different areas. Their existing legacy systems were keeping them from doing that. And so what they really were able to establish here was kind of an agile DevOps foundation for moving forward and how they deal with digital transformation and how they serve new use cases, new apps inside of their organization. Very similar experience. In this case, this is a top 10 insurer in the United States. This is the organization I referenced earlier, 2 billion existing objects, 30,000 users, 6 or 7 different lines of business in 7 different lines of business inside their organization, and literally 100 existing apps that they needed to move off and onto a more modern platform. Key benefit for them here, and this is why we hit the importance of the API earlier, was they really wanted to establish a data abstraction layer through the APIs, which really meant, again, establishing content as a service for the organization. So that ability to kind of abstract an API service layer and serve content to a variety of different applications, as well as supporting applications that get built on top of this content platform, was critical for them. Key goals here: significant total cost of ownership reduction versus their existing legacy systems, the ability to manage both rich media as well as documents. Again, this is property and casualty insurer, so think about modern claims processing, think about all of the artifacts that we have to deal with there. And I think most importantly for this customer was, and we used to title this case study kind of moving from the file cabinet to the boardroom. Really, the old information systems and the legacy ECM system was viewed as a file cabinet. Nuxio in this environment is now viewed as a strategic service for the organization that is enabling them to better service customers, to better automate processes, and really is of value to the entire organization as a platform to move forward. And I think that's the punchline for all of these case studies. Is the bottom line is moving from a simple information access, storage, and retrieval paradigm to a paradigm where these customers are able to take advantage of information as a strategic service for the organization. So I won't spend a ton of time on this slide, but we talked about connecting to existing information sources, and we talked about that ability to establish that master metadata layer. It becomes very important for our customers. And when you think about an organization like the last one we just talked about, who has so many apps to move across, critical challenge, right? How do I do all this? Can't be a big bang project. There's a lot of complexity here. And what we really try to talk to customers about and help them with is just take a more intelligent, rational approach to this. If you think about application rationalization, hey, let's connect to your existing data and content sources. Let's be able to integrate across multiple repositories and then begin to strategically move over time applications. Focus on the ones that have the highest value, will give you rapid ROI, but also to put in place that consistent foundation for modernization. And then over time, we'll begin to consolidate, migrate content, data, retire legacy systems, reduce requirements, reliance on those systems, decrease that total cost of ownership, begin to decommission some of these legacy applications, and ultimately get to a single future-proof platform for the organization that will operate anywhere you want it to, whether it's in the cloud, on premises, or anywhere in between.